Hello again. This is the second video of Module 2, Introduction to TypeScript. And this particular video is going to be dealing with classes. So what is a class, you might be asking? Classes were introduced in TypeScript and ES6, and essentially what they are is just a fancy syntactical sugar, as it is called, over basically what is an immediately invoked function expression, or what is sometimes referred to in JavaScript as a closure. So as you can see, we've got our class right here in TypeScript. Once again, we're in the TypeScript playground from typescriptlang.org. So we've got our class here, class greeter, and you can see over here in the compiled JavaScript, it compiles over to this immediately invoked function expression. Now, classes are really useful for basically setting up a function within JavaScript that's going to be able to hold its own state. It's going to have its own variables, it's going to have its own methods. And this particular pattern is useful for keeping your code organized, and as well as basically providing modules that you can share different pieces of your code and have it interact with and be able to keep that state steady. So let's go ahead and move over to Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you how to set a class up. In TypeScript, it's really quite easy to set a class up. You just use the class keyword and name your class. And let's just do some class. And it's really that simple. And now we can go ahead and do some basic things with our class, such as set variables within the class. So let's set a number in it, some number. And we're going to set the type to number. And you'll notice that setting a type within a class is really the same as setting a type outside of a class. The only difference is that you're not using let or var to instantiate the variable. And the reason you don't do that is because when you instantiate a variable inside of a class, it is becoming a property of this variable within the class. And you can see that when you're going to go ahead and make a method. So let's make a method real quick. And for some people that aren't familiar with the term, a method is just another term for a function. So in order to access that variable from within this method, we would just use this dot some number. And let's just go ahead and assign it a value of 5 real quick. Now, if we were to access all of these values outside of the class, let's go ahead and add a default value to this real fast so that we can see that. Now, in order to do that, we're first going to have to assign a variable to what's called an instance of the class. So in order to do that, we're going to do instance of some class. And you use the new keyword to create an instantiation. And so that basically will allow you to then use that variable to reference any of the properties within it. So we've got instance of some class dot some number. And that will be, see, you can see that that's typed as a number, and that's a reference to this property up here. And you can call a value of method. You can call methods the same way using that instantiation. And so that's how you reference variables from inside of a class, outside of a class, using an instantiation. And the nice thing about that is it lets you keep control of different instantiations because they will be separate. So like, let's say you needed to do let instance 2 equals new some class. This instance 2 instance of some class will have a completely different and separate state from your original instance of some class, and that's really useful. And for those of you that are familiar with kind of old school Angular, Angular services use kind of a similar pattern to allow you to kind of maintain state. So you probably noticed that you can access all of these different variables from outside of the class. Well, so there are certain instances where you wouldn't necessarily want that to be the case. And for that, you can use the private keyword. And basically what that private keyword will do will be it will restrict the variable to not being able to be accessed out of the class. So really this can only be used then at that point. You can see that it's still able to be used in this method, but it's not being able to be used by any of these instances outside of the class. And there's also a couple other modifiers that you can use to kind of manipulate how different variables and methods within your class can be accessed. And another one of those is protected, which really does the same thing as private, except for that derived classes from your original class, which we'll get into extending a class here in a little bit. But basically, those will still be able to access the variable, but things outside of the class won't be able to. And there is also read only. You'll notice read only gives this an error here, because read only will basically make it so that only the default value can be set, or it can be set within a constructor function, which we're going to get to here in a minute. But this assignment here within the sum method won't be valid at that point, because it's trying to basically change something that's being assigned as read only. And there are a couple of special modifiers that are only for methods, and those are called accessors. And they are the get and set keywords, and they do some kind of special stuff. So let's make a get method real quick. And basically what the get keyword will allow you to do is it's basically a function that will only return a value from your class. You can't use it to modify anything within the class. So this is useful for setting things that basically you only want to be able to retrieve information from the class, but you don't want to change anything with it. So it's kind of useful for specific things that you want some code to be restricted. And the set keyword is kind of the exact opposite. Basically what it allows you to do is make a method where all that it does is sets a value within your class. So basically, you can pass it a parameter, and it will set a variable in your class to the parameter that you pass it. Now, one more thing that I wanted to go over was the constructor method of a class. And the constructor method is a special method within the class that runs on the instantiation of a class. So it's really useful for establishing default values to things that you've already got typed out. So let's just make an element real quick. And one of the really useful things about a constructor is that you can pass parameters to it, and then you can go ahead and assign those to the variable that you've already typed out based on the parameter that you've passed into it. So then your instantiation down here can pass a parameter into it. And so let's just go ahead and say let this element equals document. Let's just go ahead and say we're making a div real quick here. And so what we could do is we can pass that div as the instantiation parameter, and it will essentially bind it to this instantiation of the class. And so that's really useful for basically making classes that you can use dynamically with data that you're passing in from outside of the class. And so now we've got our class here, and one more thing that you can do that's really cool with classes is you can extend them and create subclasses. So in order to do that, we will create an extended class, and then we use the extends keyword and reference the class that we are extending. So in this case, our extended class is extending some class. Now, what extending a class does is it will give this subclass access to all of the properties that are public or that are protected within the parent class. So in order to do that, we have to make a constructor method within our extended class, and then we have to use the super call here. And this super call basically asks the extended class to get the variables from the parent class. Now you'll notice there's an error here, and that's because when you call super, you have to call it with essentially the same parameters that the constructor function of the parent class is expecting. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and add a parameter to the constructor function of the derived class with the same type as what's being expected in the constructor, and then we will pass that same parameter to the super call so that it can get the values from the sum class. So then if we were to make a method, we would see that we could in fact access this dot some number, the property of the parent class. So that's really what the supercall is for. And really what deriving a class is for is to be able to create extended functionality that is outside of the core functionality of your original class. So if we were to go ahead and instantiate this extended class, we would, instead of calling the new keyword on some class here, we would change this to new extended class. And you'll see that, in fact, the instance of some class.someNumber is still accessible, and also that, we're passing the same element in. It's passing it up to the constructor of the extended class, and therefore it's getting passed up to the parent class. So that's pretty much classes in TypeScript in a nutshell. This video you learned how to use classes, how to instantiate them, how to create them, how to extend them, and how to use all the different kinds of properties in them, including constructor functions, get and set methods, and private and public methods, all that jazz. So I hope this has been informative. Stay tuned for our next video, where we will discuss type assertion, interfaces, and type compatibility. That'll be exciting. All right.